Welcome to a journey back in time, a journey to an age of emperors, warriors, and the struggle for the soul of an empire. If you love stories of courage, loyalty, and the rise and fall of civilizations, you're in the right place. Today, we're diving deep into one of history's most remarkable tales, the story of Belisarius, the last great general of Rome. Before we embark on this incredible adventure through blood, glory, and betrayal, please remember to hit that like button, share this video with fellow history lovers, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more amazing stories from the past to life. Now, let's begin our story in the year 532, in the heart of the greatest city on earth, Constantinople. Picture this magnificent metropolis, a city of over 500,000 souls, where golden domes pierce the sky and marble streets gleam in the Mediterranean sun. The Hagia Sophia, still under construction, promises to be the most magnificent church in Christendom. The great palace sprawls across terraced gardens overlooking the Bosphorus, while the Hippodrome echoes with the roars of 100,000 spectators watching chariot races that can determine the fate of empires. But on this January day, those same golden domes are shrouded in smoke and chaos. The marble streets run red with blood. The air is thick with fear, the acrid smell of burning buildings, and the desperate cries of a city tearing itself apart. This is not the work of foreign invaders. No Persian army or barbarian horde has breached the mighty walls of Constantinople. No, the city is burning from within. Its own people, citizens of the Eastern Roman Empire, have risen up in fury that threatens to consume everything. The trouble began, as it often did, in the Hippodrome. The chariot racing factions, the Blues and the Greens, were more than just sports teams. They were political parties, religious movements, and street gangs all rolled into one. Each faction had tens of thousands of passionate supporters who would live and die for their colors. Normally, their rivalry was contained within the racing arena, but political tensions had been building for months. Emperor Justinian had been cracking down on corruption and violence, and several faction members had been sentenced to death. When two of them survived their executions, their ropes breaking in what many saw as divine intervention, the crowds demanded their release. Justinian refused, and the city exploded. "Nika! Nika!" the crowds roared, "Victory! Victory!" as they rampaged through the streets. They burned the Senate House, the baths of Zeuxippus, and parts of the great palace itself. Government officials were hunted down and murdered. The mob proclaimed a new emperor, Hypatius, nephew of a former ruler, and marched on the palace to install him on the throne. Inside his palace, Emperor Justinian paced like a caged lion. This was the man who dreamed of restoring the Roman Empire to its ancient glory, who had already begun reforming the laws and rebuilding the empire's defenses. Now, barely 5 years into his reign, he faced the possibility that it would all end in flames and blood. His advisors urged him to flee. Ships waited in the harbor, ready to carry the imperial family to safety. But in this moment of ultimate crisis, Justinian found strength not in his generals or his gold, but in his wife, Empress Theodora. This remarkable woman, born in the lowest ranks of society as the daughter of a bear-keeper in the Hippodrome, had risen to become the most powerful woman in the world. Her words that day would echo through history. "Those who have worn the crown should never survive its loss. Never will I see the day when I am not saluted as Empress. If you wish to flee, Caesar, well and good. You have the money, the ships are ready, the sea is open. As for me, I shall stay. I love the old saying, the royal purple is the noblest shroud." Inspired by Theodora's courage, Justinian made his choice. He would not flee, he would fight, and for that fight, he turned to his most trusted general, a man whose name would echo through the ages, Belisarius. Flavius Belisarius was not born to greatness. Like his emperor, he came from the rugged countryside of Illyricum, in what we now call North Macedonia. His family was neither noble nor wealthy, but they were free Romans, and that meant something in an age when citizenship still carried weight. As a young man, Belisarius had joined the imperial guard, where his intelligence, courage, and natural leadership quickly set him apart. By 532, at barely 35 years old, Belisarius had already proven himself in the brutal wars against Persia. He was tall and powerfully built, with the kind of presence that made men want to follow him into battle. His wife, Antonina, was as remarkable as Theodora. The daughter of an actress and charioteer, she was intelligent, ambitious, and utterly devoted to her husband's career. Together, they formed one of the most formidable partnerships in Byzantine politics. The Roman army that Belisarius commanded was vastly different from the legions that had once conquered the world. Centuries of warfare against Huns, Persians, and Germanic tribes had transformed Roman military tactics. The core of the army now consisted of heavy cavalry, the clibanarii and cataphracts, armored horsemen who could charge with devastating effect or rain arrows from a distance. These were professional soldiers, many of them barbarians, who had sworn loyalty to Rome and fought with the discipline and skill that had once made the legions invincible. The elite troops were the Belisarius, hand-picked warriors who swore personal loyalty to their general. These men were more than soldiers, they were brothers in arms who would die before they abandoned their commander. Belisarius's Belisarius numbered in the thousands, and their loyalty to him was absolute. When Justinian called upon Belisarius to end the riots, the general knew that half measures would not suffice. The mob had to be crushed completely, or the empire would fall. Working with Mundus, another loyal general, and the eunuch Narses, Belisarius devised a plan that was as brutal as it was effective. The rebels had gathered in the Hippodrome, where they were proclaiming Hypatius as the new emperor. The massive arena, which could hold 100,000 spectators, was packed with armed rioters. Belisarius positioned his troops at the exits, then gave the order that would save the empire and stain his hands with the blood of Roman citizens. The slaughter was terrible and swift. Trapped in the arena with no escape, the rioters were cut down by disciplined soldiers. The sand of the Hippodrome, which had seen so many gladiatorial contests and chariot races, was soaked with blood. When it was over, 30,000 people lay dead, men, women, and children who had risen against their emperor and paid the ultimate price. Hypatius and his brother were dragged before Justinian and executed. The city fell silent, cowed by the display of imperial power. The Nika Riots were over, but the memory of that day would haunt Constantinople for generations. Even before the riots, Belisarius had been making his reputation on the eastern frontier, where the Roman Empire faced its most dangerous enemy, the Persian Empire of the Sassanids. For centuries, these two great powers had clashed along their shared border, fighting over trade routes, client kingdoms, and the ancient cities of Mesopotamia. The Persian king, Kavad I, was a formidable opponent who had already humiliated one Roman emperor and extracted massive tribute payments. When war broke out again in 527, many expected another Persian victory. Instead, they encountered Belisarius. The young general's first great triumph came at the fortress city of Dara in 530. The Persians, confident in their numerical superiority, sent an army of 40,000 men to capture this key border stronghold. Belisarius had only 25,000 troops, but he had something more valuable than numbers: a brilliant tactical mind and soldiers who trusted him completely. Instead of cowering behind Dara's walls, Belisarius chose to fight in the open field. He spent days preparing the battlefield, digging trenches and positioning his forces with mathematical precision. When the Persian army arrived, they found the Romans waiting in a formation that seemed almost too clever to be real. The battle lasted 2 days and became the stuff of legend. On the first day, the armies exchanged volleys of arrows while individual champions fought duels between the lines. A Roman wrestling instructor named Andreas became a hero when he defeated 2 Persian champions in single combat, lifting Roman morale and demoralizing the enemy. On the second day, the Persians launched their main assault. Wave after wave of armored cavalry crashed against the Roman lines, but Belisarius had prepared for this. Hidden forces of Hun mercenaries struck the Persian flanks at precisely the right moment. While his own cavalry charged from concealed positions, the Persian army, caught in a perfectly executed pincer movement, collapsed in panic. 8,000 Persians died on the field of Dara, including many of their finest nobles and generals. It was the most complete Roman victory over Persia in living memory, and it made Belisarius famous throughout the empire. With the eastern frontier secure and the capital pacified, Justinian could finally pursue his greatest ambition: the reconquest of the western provinces that had been lost to barbarian kingdoms. The Western Roman Empire had fallen in 476, but Justinian refused to accept that this was permanent. He saw himself as the heir to Augustus and Constantine, destined to restore the empire to its ancient boundaries. The first target was North Africa, ruled by the Vandals. These Germanic warriors had crossed from Spain a century earlier, conquering the richest provinces of the old empire and establishing a kingdom that stretched from Morocco to Libya. From their capital at Carthage, Vandal pirates raided Roman shipping and even sacked Rome itself in 455. But by 533, the Vandal kingdom was weakening. King Hilderic, who had maintained peaceful relations with Constantinople, had been overthrown by his cousin Gelimer in a bloody coup. This gave Justinian the perfect excuse for intervention. He would restore the legitimate king and liberate the oppressed Roman population of Africa. The expedition was a massive undertaking. Belisarius was given command of 16,000 men, 10,000 infantry, 5,000 cavalry, and 1,000 barbarian mercenaries, along with a fleet of 500 ships. It was the largest Roman naval expedition in centuries, and its success or failure would determine the fate of Justinian's dreams of reconquest. The invasion of North Africa began in June 533, when Belisarius's fleet sailed from Constantinople. The general had learned from the disasters that had befallen previous expeditions to Africa. He insisted on strict discipline, fair treatment of civilians, and careful preparation for every aspect of the campaign. When the Romans landed near Carthage, they found a population ready to welcome them as liberators. The Vandals, never numerous, had ruled as a warrior elite over a much larger Roman population. Many of these people had never forgotten their Roman identity and saw Belisarius's arrival as a chance for freedom. The first major battle came at Ad Decimum, just 10 miles from Carthage. Gelimer had planned an elaborate ambush, with 3 separate forces converging on the Roman army simultaneously. It was a clever plan that might have worked against a less experienced commander. But Belisarius had anticipated such tactics, and when the Vandal forces arrived at different times and in confusion, he defeated them in detail. The victory at Ad Decimum opened the road to Carthage. When Belisarius entered the city, he found the Vandal royal palace still set for dinner. Gelimer had fled so quickly that the food was still warm on the tables. The Roman general made a point of dining from the king's own plates, a symbolic gesture that was not lost on the watching population. But the war was far from over. Gelimer rallied his remaining forces and prepared for a final confrontation. The decisive battle came at Tricamarum, where the Vandals made their last stand. It was a hard-fought engagement that could have gone either way, but when Gelimer's brother Zazo was killed leading a cavalry charge, Vandal resistance collapsed. Gelimer himself fled to the mountains, where he held out for months before finally surrendering. When he was brought before Belisarius, the former king was a broken man who could only laugh at the reversal of his fortunes. He would spend the rest of his life as a pampered prisoner on a Roman estate, a living symbol of Justinian's triumph. The conquest of North Africa was complete in just 6 months. An entire kingdom had been destroyed, and one of the richest provinces of the old empire was restored to Roman rule. The victory sent shockwaves throughout the Mediterranean world and established Belisarius as the greatest general of his age. Belisarius returned to Constantinople in 534 to a hero's welcome. Justinian awarded him a triumph, the first granted to a non-emperor in over 500 years. The streets of the capital were lined with cheering crowds as the victorious general paraded through the city with his prisoners, his spoils, and his battle-hardened veterans. But even in his moment of greatest glory, Belisarius faced the suspicion that would plague him throughout his career. His very success made him dangerous in the eyes of some courtiers who whispered that a general who could conquer kingdoms might also be able to overthrow emperors. Belisarius, acutely aware of these dangers, made a point of displaying his loyalty at every opportunity. At the height of his triumph, he prostrated himself before Justinian and Theodora, making it clear that he served the empire, not his own ambition. Even as Belisarius was celebrating his African victories, events in Italy were creating new opportunities for Roman expansion. The Ostrogothic kingdom, which had ruled Italy since 493, was torn by internal strife. Queen Amalasuntha, daughter of the great king Theodoric, had been murdered by her cousin Theodahad. giving Justinian another perfect excuse for intervention. In 535, Belisarius was dispatched to Sicily with a small advance force. The island fell quickly and the Romans prepared to cross to the Italian mainland. The campaign that followed would be longer and more difficult than the African War, but it would also be Belisarius's greatest achievement. The siege of Naples marked the beginning of the real war. The city's inhabitants, a mix of Romans and Goths, initially resisted the Roman advance, but Belisarius's engineers discovered that an old aqueduct could provide access to the city. In a daring night assault, Roman soldiers crawled through the narrow tunnel and opened the gates from within. The fall of Naples sent a clear message. Roman engineering and Roman determination could overcome any obstacle. The Ostrogoths, recognizing the threat, deposed the ineffective Theodora and replaced him with Victories, an experienced military commander. But it was too late to stop Belisarius's advance on Rome itself. The Eternal City had been the heart of the world for over 1,000 years. Though much reduced from its ancient glory, it remained a powerful symbol of Roman identity and Christian faith. When the Gothic garrison abandoned the city without a fight, Belisarius entered Rome in December 536 to find a population of perhaps 100,000 people living among the ruins of a city that had once held over 1 million. Belisarius's occupation of Rome was just the beginning of his greatest challenge. In March 537, Victories arrived with an enormous army, perhaps 100,000 men, and laid siege to the city. Belisarius had only 7,000 soldiers to defend walls that stretched for 12 miles around the 7 hills of Rome. What followed was one of the most remarkable sieges in military history. For over a year, a tiny Roman garrison held out against overwhelming odds through a combination of superior tactics, engineering skill, and sheer determination. Belisarius personally supervised every aspect of the defense, from repairing ancient walls to organizing food distribution among the civilian population. The general's tactical brilliance was on full display throughout the siege. When the Goths tried to storm the walls, they found themselves facing carefully positioned artillery and disciplined volleys of arrows. When they attempted to starve the city into submission, Belisarius organized raids that kept supply lines open. Most remarkably, he managed to maintain the morale of both his soldiers and the Roman population throughout the long months of hardship. The siege finally ended when Roman reinforcements arrived, and the Goths, weakened by disease and demoralization, withdrew to Ravenna. Rome was saved, and Belisarius had proven that Roman military genius could still triumph against impossible odds. The war continued for several more years, with Belisarius methodically reducing Gothic strongholds throughout Italy. The climax came with the siege of Ravenna, the Gothic capital. Faced with starvation and hopelessness, the Gothic nobles made a desperate offer. They would make Belisarius emperor of the West if he would spare their lives and property. It was the ultimate test of the general's loyalty. Here was the chance to claim a crown, to rule an empire in his own right, rather than serve as another man's general. Many commanders throughout history had faced similar temptations and succumbed. But Belisarius never wavered. He pretended to accept the Gothic offer, entered Ravenna, and then revealed his true intentions. The Gothic king, Victories, was sent to Constantinople as a prisoner, and Italy was restored to Roman rule. Justinian, however, was not entirely pleased with his general's success. The very completeness of Belisarius's victory made the emperor suspicious. In 540, at the height of his triumph, Belisarius was recalled to Constantinople. The official reason was the outbreak of a new war with Persia, but many suspected that Justinian simply could not bear to have such a successful general operating so far from imperial oversight. The 540s brought new disasters to the Roman Empire. A terrible plague, possibly bubonic plague, swept across the Mediterranean world, killing millions of people and devastating the economy. Even Justinian fell ill, and for a time it seemed that the empire might collapse entirely. In the east, the Persian king Khosrow I took advantage of Roman weakness to launch devastating raids deep into imperial territory. The great city of Antioch was sacked, and thousands of Romans were carried off into slavery. Belisarius was dispatched to restore the situation, but with limited resources and a demoralized army, even his tactical genius could achieve only limited success. Meanwhile, in Italy, the Gothic War flared up again under the leadership of Totila, a brilliant young king who proved to be Belisarius's most dangerous opponent. With most of the Roman army tied down in the east, Italy was left almost defenseless. Totila reconquered most of the peninsula and even briefly recaptured Rome itself. Belisarius was sent back to Italy in 544, but this time he was given inadequate resources and little support from Constantinople. The campaign that followed was a frustrating series of small victories and strategic retreats. Though Belisarius managed to retake Rome and hold several key strongholds, he could not deliver the decisive victory that the situation required. In 548, Belisarius was recalled from Italy for the final time. The Gothic War would eventually be won by Narses, the eunuch general who had been Belisarius's rival since the days of the Nika Riots. But Narses succeeded only because he was given the large army and unlimited resources that had been denied to Belisarius. Belisarius spent his final years in Constantinople, honored but increasingly marginalized. He was now in his 60s, an old man by the standards of his time, and younger generals were taking over the active commands. But in 559, when a horde of Bulgars and Slavs threatened Constantinople itself, Justinian turned once more to his greatest general. With only a handful of veterans and a motley collection of volunteers, Belisarius marched out to face the barbarian army. It seemed like a hopeless mission. How could a few hundred men stop thousands of fierce warriors? But Belisarius had not forgotten the lessons of a lifetime of warfare. Through a combination of bluff, tactical brilliance, and sheer audacity, he routed the barbarian army and saved the capital one last time. It was a fitting end to an extraordinary military career. The man who had conquered kingdoms and saved empires had proven that true greatness lay not in the size of one's army, but in the quality of one's leadership. Belisarius died in 565, just a few months before his emperor. He had served Justinian faithfully for over 30 years, through triumph and disaster, victory and defeat. He had never betrayed his trust, never sought personal power, never forgotten his duty to the empire that had raised him from obscurity to greatness. The empire that Belisarius had fought to preserve would not long survive his death. Within a generation, new enemies would sweep away much of what he had won. The Lombards would conquer most of Italy, the Arabs would take North Africa and the eastern provinces, and the Slavs would overrun the Balkans. The dream of a restored Roman Empire would fade into memory, but the legend of Belisarius would endure. He became the model of the loyal general, the man who served his country rather than his own ambition. His tactical innovations influenced military thinking for centuries, and his campaigns were studied by generals from Charlemagne to Napoleon. Most importantly, Belisarius represented something that was already disappearing from the world, the ideal of Roman virtue, the belief that duty and honor mattered more than personal gain. In an age of increasing barbarism and corruption, he stood as a reminder of what Rome had once been and what it might have remained. The last great Roman general had fought his final battle, but his memory would inspire soldiers and statesmen for 1,000 years to come. In the end, that may have been his greatest victory of all. If you've been captivated by this epic tale of loyalty, courage, and the twilight of an empire, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing this video with fellow history enthusiasts, and subscribing to our channel for more incredible stories from the past. Your engagement helps us continue bringing these amazing historical narratives to life. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of history's most remarkable lives.